Okay, imagine your family gathering. Maybe, I don't know, not that long ago. The biggest fight was about uh, whose pie recipe was better.
Right, something like that. Manageable disagreements.
But now it feels like just mentioning politics could, well, clear the room. Or worse, you hear people talking about the other side like they're actively dangerous.
Yeah, like an enemy, not just someone you disagree with. That's really the core of this polarization we're seeing. It's shifted.
And it's not just a feeling, is it? The numbers seem to back this up.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources point out that something like 40% of Americans see the other political party as, well, a threat to the country.
Wow, a threat.
A threat. And think about this. People getting upset if their kid marries someone from the opposite party. That used to be pretty rare, maybe 40 years ago.
Mm.
Now it's way more common. It's almost on par with older, deeper social divides.
So that's what we're digging into in this deep dive, right? What's really behind this deep split in America.
Exactly. We've gone through a lot of research, a lot of different perspectives, but
And the goal here is to kind of cut through the noise, give you the key insights, maybe some surprising facts, so you can really get a handle on the forces pulling things apart.
right. Let's start with how people's actual views have changed. It wasn't always so black and white, politically speaking.
You mean people didn't always fit neatly into a liberal or conservative box?
Precisely. Go back, say, to the 70s. You'd find plenty of people who maybe liked lower taxes, but were also really strong on environmental protection. A mix.
Yeah, you couldn't just guess their entire platform from one opinion.
Not at all. But today, it's starkly different. The research shows if you know where someone stands on, let's say, climate change,
Mm.
you can predict their views on immigration, guns, the economy, you name it, with something like 80% accuracy.
80%, that's huge. So everything's bundled together now.
Tightly bundled. Now, looking back, it's interesting because for a long time, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, actually had, different wings within them.
Like liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. And that internal mix, well, it kind of forced them to compromise sometimes, didn't it?
Yeah.
To get anything done, they had to reach across the aisle, even within their own party sometimes.
Okay, so what broke that pattern? The sources talk about this great sorting. What was that?
Well, a really pivotal moment was the civil rights movement in the 1960s.
Okay.
As the Democratic Party really embraced racial equality, they started losing support from a lot of white voters, especially in the South.
Right. That makes sense historically.
And at the same time, cultural issues started becoming much more prominent. Things like school prayer, and then later, obviously, abortion after Roe v. Wade.
Mm.
Those issues really started pushing more religiously conservative voters towards the Republican Party.
So it wasn't just one thing. It was like these big social and cultural waves hitting at the same time, pushing people in different directions.
That's a good way to put it, a realignment. And Ronald Reagan's election in 1980 is often seen as sort of cementing that sorting process. Well, conservatives really became the driving force in the Republican Party, and liberals found a clearer home in the Democratic Party. The overlap started shrinking.
But it feels like it went beyond just sorting into different teams. The tone changed, didn't it? It got meaner.
It absolutely did. That really picked up steam in the 90s. And one name that comes up a lot in the sources is Newt Gingrich.
Okay, what was his role?
His approach was quite different. It wasn't just we disagree on policy. It was more like treating the Democrats not as the loyal opposition, but as, well, an enemy.
An enemy.
Yeah. He even had this famous memo, right, listing negative words Republicans should use to describe Democrats, words like corrupt, pathetic, even traitors.
Wow, traitors. That's a massive escalation from just policy disagreements.
It really changed the language and the temperature of politics.
Sure.
And then you had events that just poured fuel on that fire. The 2000 election, incredibly close, contested.
Right, Bush v. Gore.
Exactly. Then, okay, there was a brief moment of unity after 9/11, but it didn't hold. The Iraq War created huge divisions. And then the election of Barack Obama. That definitely surfaced and intensified a lot of the underlying racial and cultural tensions. You saw the rise of the Tea Party movement largely reacting against his presidency.
And it seems like things have only escalated since then.
Well, the sources certainly emphasized that Donald Trump's presidency, with his often confrontational style and rhetoric, definitely amplified those existing divisions even further.
Okay, so that's kind of the journey of how we got more divided. But what keeps us stuck here? Why do we stay so far apart? Let's talk media. That feels huge.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. I mean, think back, it wasn't that long ago when most people got their news from maybe one of 3 TV networks.
Right. Or the local newspaper. Everyone was kind of getting the same basic story, more or less.
Exactly. A shared set of facts, generally speaking. But today,
Totally different world. Information overload, and it feels like it's curated just for me or just for you.
that's it. First, you had cable news, CNN, then Fox News, MSNBC, starting to cater to specific viewpoints. But then social media just put that on hyperdrive.
How so? The algorithms.
Yeah, platforms like Facebook, YouTube, their goal is to keep you watching, keep you clicking. So the algorithms learn what grabs your attention.
And what grabs attention?
Often it's stuff that confirms what you already believe. Or, even more powerfully, stuff that makes you angry at the other side.
So they feed you more of what makes you mad or validates your bubble?
Pretty much. It maximizes engagement, but it can also push people further into their corners. It's like we end up living in completely different media realities.
The sources had a really stark example of this, didn't they? Something about COVID-19 views.
Yes, the survey back in 2020, it showed a huge gap. Most Fox News viewers, something like 61%, thought COVID was maybe comparable to the flu.
Okay.
But among MSNBC viewers, it was only 2%. Just 2%.
Wow. That's not just a difference of opinion. That's like seeing a completely different reality.
Exactly. And if you can't even agree on the basic nature of a problem, how can you possibly find common ground on solutions? It makes collaboration incredibly difficult.
Okay, so media silos are one big force. What about the economy? It feels like there are two Americas economically sometimes.
That's definitely another major factor the sources highlight. Since around the 1970s, income inequality has just exploded.
Right. You hear about the top 1%.
Yeah, the top 1% now holds more wealth than the entire bottom 90% combined. It's a massive gap. And this economic split often maps onto geography, too.
You mean like thriving cities versus struggling rural areas?
Sort of. You have these booming urban centers, often driven by tech or knowledge industries. And then you have many rural areas or former industrial towns that have seen factories close, jobs disappear.
And those different realities must shape how people see the world and politics.
Absolutely. If you're in a town where the main employer left years ago, your view on trade, on government support, on opportunity, it's likely going to be very different from someone in a buzzing tech hub.
And education levels seem tied into this now, too, more than before.
Yes, there's a growing link, especially since the 80s, between having a college degree and voting patterns, which reflects some of these broader economic and geographic shifts.
It's not just our media feeds or our jobs, though. It's literally where we live. This idea of the big sort.
Right. This is the trend of people increasingly choosing to live in places where most people share their political views.
Is that really happening on a large scale?
The numbers are pretty striking. Back in, say, 1976, about a quarter of Americans lived in what you'd call a landslide county, where one presidential candidate won by a really big margin.
Okay, 25%.
Today, that number is over 60%.
60%. That's a huge jump. So we're literally clustering ourselves.
We are. And the consequence is you just don't interact as much with people who see the world differently.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Or worse, when you don't know people from the other side personally, it's much easier to just believe negative stereotypes about them. They become caricatures, not real people.
Which feeds right into this feeling that politics isn't just about policy anymore. It's about who we are, our identity.
That's a really crucial piece of the puzzle. Politics has become tangled up with our core identities in a way it perhaps wasn't before.
Like how?
Well, take religion. Regularly going to church is now a very strong predictor of voting Republican, never attending. Much more likely to vote Democrat. Race 2. White voters, especially those without college degrees, have moved more towards the Republican Party. Black voters remain overwhelmingly Democratic. Hispanic and Asian voters tend to lean Democratic, though there's diversity there too.
And you mentioned geography earlier, the city versus country divide.
Definitely. Big cities, heavily Democratic, rural areas, heavily Republican. The suburbs are often where the battles are fought.
And education, as we touched on. College grads leaning more Dem, non-college leaning more GOP.
Right. So when your race, your religion, where you live, your education level, when all these deep parts of your identity line up so strongly with a political party.
Compromise starts to feel like betraying your group, or even betraying yourself.
Exactly. It makes finding common ground much harder because it feels personal. It feels like an identity threat.
And on top of all that, it feels like the way we actually do politics, our election system, might be making things worse.
The sources suggest that, yeah, Several aspects of American democracy can unintentionally crank up the polarization. Think about primary elections.
Okay, how do they fit in?
Well, turnout in primaries is usually pretty low, right? And the people who do vote tend to be the most committed, often more ideologically driven members of the party,
The base.
the base. So to win a primary, candidates often have to appeal to the more extreme wings of their party, the far left or the far right.
Which means the candidates who make it to the general election might be further apart than the average voter.
That's often the dynamic. Then there's gerrymandering.
Huh. Drawing the district lines.
Exactly. In many places, politicians draw these electoral district maps specifically to create safe seats for their party.
So they don't really need to worry about appealing to the other side.
Much less so. Their main challenge is winning the primary within their own party,
Yeah.
which again incentivizes playing to the base. That's why you see so few truly competitive House districts these days.
And fundraising, especially online fundraising.
That's another piece. In the social media age, making really strong, sometimes outrageous statements can get you a ton of attention online.
Go viral.
Right. And that attention can translate directly into small dollar donations from people who are really fired up.
Yeah.
So there's almost a financial incentive for extremism.
There was a stat about that, wasn't there? About emotional language online.
Yeah, studies show tweets using moral or emotional language get shared much more often. Outrage travels fast online.
It sounds like psychologically we're kind of wired for this division, this us versus them thing.
There's definitely a human tendency towards tribalism, yeah.
Yeah.
We naturally categorize ourselves into groups, our team, our nation, our party.
And maybe as other traditional groups have weakened, politics fills that gap.
That's a compelling argument some sources make.
Mm.
Think about it. Membership in unions has declined, so has regular church attendance for many. Participation in local civic groups isn't what it used to be.
Mm.
So for some people, political identity has become one of the main ways they define who's us and who's them.
And all the change happening in the world, does that play into it? All the shifts in demographics, technology, culture.
Absolutely. Rapid change can be unsettling. Think about the demographic shifts, America becoming more racially diverse, the projection of becoming a minority-majority nation by around 2045,
Hi.
or technological change, automation, AI, changing the nature of work,
Mm-hmm.
and cultural shifts around gender, sexuality, family structures, religion.
All huge changes.
Huge, and people react differently. Some see these changes as progress, others see them as threats to their way of life or their values. And that anxiety, that differing reaction, often gets channeled into political conflict. There's this concept of status threat. Some groups, particularly some white voters, feeling their traditional position in society is eroding.
It almost feels engineered sometimes. Like some people benefit from all this anger. The sources mentioned conflict entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's a term used to describe people or groups who actually profit financially or politically from stirring up division.
Like who?
Could be certain cable news hosts whose ratings depend on outrage, social media personalities who build a following on extreme takes, or even politicians who find that angry emails raise more money.
Back to that idea that outrage gets clicks and donations.
Exactly. If your business model or your political strategy relies on keeping people angry at the other side, you have a strong incentive to keep fueling the fire.
And layered on top of all this is a decline in trust, right? Trust in, well, almost everything.
That's a really big problem. Public trust in major institutions, government, the media, religion organizations, universities, even businesses, has fallen significantly over the past few decades.
So if you don't trust the traditional authorities or sources of information,
Who do you trust? You're more likely to just trust your own tribe, your own political side, and dismiss information that comes from outside that circle. It deepens the echo chambers.
one last point the sources brought up was really interesting, this idea that liberals and conservatives might actually have different moral foundations.
Yeah, this comes from the work of Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist. His research suggests that, broadly speaking, liberals tend to prioritize moral values, like care preventing harm and fairness.
Okay.
Conservatives, while valuing those too, tend to place relatively greater emphasis on other values, like loyalty to the group, respect for authority, and sanctity or purity.
So we're not just disagreeing on policy. We might be operating from fundamentally different moral rulebooks.
In some ways, yes. And that can make it incredibly hard to understand why the other side believes what they believe. It can seem baffling or even immoral, because they're prioritizing different moral concerns.
Wow. Okay, so putting it all together, it's clear this isn't simple. Polarization isn't just one thing.
Not at all. It's this incredibly complex, not history, economics, where we live, how we get our news, our psychology, our identities, even our election rules, all tangled together.
It sounds pretty daunting. Is there any way out? Do the sources offer any hope?
They do offer potential paths forward, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but there are ideas. Things like electoral reforms, maybe ranked choice voting or open primaries, or having independent commissions draw district lines to reduce gerrymandering.
So changing the system's incentives.
Exactly.
Right.
And also tackling the media environment, more transparency from social media platforms about algorithms, better media literacy education so people can spot manipulation. Supporting local journalism could help too.
And what about us? What can people do on a more personal level?
Well, there's a lot of focus on rebuilding connections. Initiatives like Braver Angels that try to bring reds and blues together for conversation, getting involved in community service across political lines, supporting leaders who actually try to unify rather than divide. And individually, making an effort to listen to different perspectives, maybe consuming news from outside your usual bubble.
And just trying to see the people on the other side as people.
Fundamentally, yes. Recognizing their humanity, even when you strongly disagree. It's tough, but crucial.
It makes me think of that Abraham Lincoln quote right in the middle of the Civil War saying, "We are not enemies, but friends."
We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. Yeah, it feels incredibly relevant right now, doesn't it?
It really does, because the future, I guess, depends on whether we choose that path or keep going down the road of division.
That seemed to be the choice. And understanding why we're so divided, all these factors we've talked about, the media, the sorting, the identity, the economics, that understanding is really the essential first step.
So maybe the question for you listening is, which of these forces resonates most with what you see around you? Is it the media bubbles, the economic stress, the way politics has become tied to identity? Thinking about that might be the best takeaway from this deep dive.